That's when we started brainstorming. Well, with this lowball offer, we've just got to beat it. The clock is ticking. We've got about a month before this offer expires. And if we're able to come up with just slightly higher than what they came in as, there's not really going to be a choice. Going to kind of have to go with ours because it's a better offer.
Cash flow. Cash flow. Did you clear your cash flow?
Well, we got Suzie Dergham on the show today. You are the CEO of Guru Experience Company, and you've got a really interesting story. It kind of blew me away when I heard like the path of the company and kind of like the near-death experience of the company, and how you guided the company through that whole journey. So I'm really excited to dive into that. I want to get into your product, your market, what you do in that market. But yeah, just to kick things off, if you don't mind, just kind of giving a quick overview of yourself and, of course, going into Guru Experience and what your product does.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I really appreciate you having me on the show and excited to talk about it. My background is not in business or from the startup world whatsoever. My background is actually degree in fine arts printmaking, which is very beneficial in the real world and in supporting a family. But it translated into my natural passions, which has always been technology, and always loved anything tech and computer related, and setting up all computers within my bedroom as a kid. So kind of blending the two things together, my passions of art and museums and the desire to always learn more, which is really what Guru Experience Co. does in the museum space, is allowing people to dive deeper, get a more enhanced experience on site, and really kind of learn some of the what we like to call like Easter eggs within the museum. So like if I go to a museum and we're just kind of doing that initial discovery phase, I get walked around with the curators or somebody from leadership, and they tell me all the cool behind the scene things of all the places in the museum that I'm like, this is what the visitor wants to hear. And that really kind of blends those two things together. So yeah, I really love what I do, and it's pretty exciting once you actually get to hear all the cool stories about the museum and all the collections and stuff they have. So that's really kind of what Guru Experience Co. does, and kind of brings it all together.
Cool. And it's I've done those tours before where there's like a tablet. Maybe it was your product. I don't remember, but so essentially, as a museum visitor, you kind of go in and you purchase the I don't know if it's free or if you purchase the guided experience, and then you get a tablet, and it just kind of like gives you a guided tour through the space. You can kind of like zoom in on things and read the history and just kind of get like really extra detail that you wouldn't get just walking through on your own. Is that an accurate summary?
Yeah, essentially, my background actually came from moving to New York City out of college, and the desire to work in the most famous museum, at least in the U.S., at MoMA, Museum of Fine Arts, in New York, and realized that I didn't have the qualifications to even be a ticket taker there. They have some pretty high standards. So really kind of looked through all my options of how can I get into this world. And that's when I kind of started looking at from the vendor side. And very uniquely, I think, being on the vendor side to a nonprofit institution like that, you actually get to move in pretty quickly. As a ticket taker, I probably would have never had any interactions with anybody above visitor services management or anything like that. But where I got my into this world was, I started with a company, was good at management. So I started as the manager of their on-site audio tour program, which was founded by Bloomberg. And was able to basically distribute, hand out audio devices, the ones you went and picked up and collected and held to your ear and listened on site. And that really gave me the basic knowledge of like how this whole industry works. But it led me to a point where I was like, okay, these, antiquated devices are extremely hard to manage. There's a lot of hardware upkeep involved in them, and everybody has a phone in their pocket. And why not use that as the go-to? And especially as we look to younger generations, they're not going to pick up, an audio tour from a desk with, kind of looks like an old school telephone punching buttons. They're going to Google stuff. They're like, well, I could find this stuff on Google. So if you can meet them where they're at with a device that's already in their pocket with content that's actually museum content, presented by the museums for the users, we should meet them there. But that's where it kind of blends over into the next step of what our product does, which is being cloud-based, where all of the stuff can be updated, content updates on the fly in real time and managed by either us as a service provider or the museums themselves.
Cool. And is it like, do the users that are attending the museums, do they bring their own device and download the software, or is it a device is handed to them when they purchase the tour?
It's a mixture of both. Some places, if they have, an audience that is, I would say, like below the age of 55, if their core demographics are below that, then they tend to steer towards, we don't need on-site devices. We just promote the app, tell people what to download. There's got to be a lot of marketing involved from the museum side where they're actually telling people this is available and they should access it. But we do help some of our clients. Like we have one client that is, they have a lot of like World War II planes or Cold War stuff. And so a lot of the people that come in there are, vets or bringing their family, and maybe the younger kids will just download the app. But then we also help them facilitate having, something on site where, you've got somebody who's like, I don't know what to do with my own phone. They can just be handed a device and be able to access it that way as well.
Cool. Is it normally free? Like, do the visitors normally get this service for free, or do they normally pay for the tour?
Most of the time it's free. I would say all of our clients but one have it free, but that means that it has to be either, funded by the museum or funded by a grant. There's a lot of grant proposals that go into these things, which contributes to our sales cycle, as we can probably jump into. But it tends to be funded by some sort of accessibility grant, something that is educational. Accessibility is a big one, giving people the ability to, use screen readers or enlarged text or things like that. But that definitely means that museums have to, find the money to support it and then provide it. But some cases it's paid, and that normally goes with special exhibitions. If it's a special exhibition where, it's a traveling exhibition, it might be a paid type of thing. But for the most part, we try to steer away from that just because it creates a lot more finance that everybody has to do. And if we don't have to do that part, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, makes sense. The grant thing, that's interesting. We hadn't talked about that in the last call. So I guess, like, do you help the museums get the grants, or is it something that they have to take on their own to go and write the grants and try to win them?
So we tend to work hand in hand with them. They have better access to like what grants are available, but then we tailor our proposals, all of our documentation to that specific type of grant that they're going for. So for example, if it's an accessibility grant, we help outline, all of the ways that accessibility will be, more adaptive with using this type of platform and device. We also have a few that we've helped, with grant writing and kind of writing that stuff. Tends to be, depending on the size of the institution, that most institutions have like a dedicated grant specialist on staff whose like sole job is to like write for grants.
I'm sure that's a tedious job.
Yeah, one that I would not want to have.
How many museums do you have? Like, or how many different sites do you have the product installed?
So right now we have 17, which I think sounds like a small number. And when most of the kind of startup world comes back into it, and you're talking about selling the company and all those things, a lot of the concern comes around client concentration. But the space is not very large, and I'm sure from sales, you can spend the same amount of time on a sale that's going to make the company $10,000 a year as you are that's going to make you $200,000 a year. And we kind of put our efforts in that middle range. We do have lower end products that make $6,000-$7,000 a year, but most of our clients are in the range of between 8 to 20,000 a month range for what we provide.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a great price point. And I'm sure there's there's probably a ton of room to grow. That's probably a good segue because you celebrated a really awesome milestone for the company, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yes.
The company is now employee owned, and that's a really I want you to tell the story in your words, but that's a really big milestone that the listeners I think will really appreciate after they hear your story and kind of what the company and what you went through to get to where you're at now.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first came into the company, I came in as an employee. I had really been thinking about leaving the industry altogether. I wasn't in line with where things were going. A lot of things were still very device focused, and this is right at the end of 2019. So before things completely shut down, but I was watching a lot of investment being put into device management and leasing and owning and maintaining devices, which is a huge overhead cost, for a company that is then providing them on site, which requires site staff and operations. So there's a lot of costs that go into devices and maintaining and staffing on site. So I really started kind of thinking and looking around and realized that there was this company, Guru, that wasn't as well known on the East Coast at the time. I was still on the East Coast, and I was like, if I don't think many museums really know this company exists, which is completely app device based, but on your own device. But on top of that, it actually has a platform that is a CMS, a content management system that is managing that app in real time and pushing content to those devices. And I was like, if I worked for this company, I would be, standing on the mountaintop shouting about it, because most of the clients that I was working with at the time were going through, for MoMA, we had 2,000 devices that were all trusted to one Mac and all had to be plugged in if we had one content change, which took hours of the staff and my time, which just didn't seem like a very logical way to go about it. And so, I looked into Guru Experience Co., realized we had, a couple overlaps of, people that we knew, and I got in touch and, ultimately got brought on. Initially, I think for like a couple weeks, I was maybe the director of operations. I don't even remember really what the title was, but that lasted for like, a week or two when, very quickly, I became the COO and was just kind of running management and all of our client stuff and pretty much everything we were doing, which then led me to have access to everything. And, it very quickly became clear that the way the company was going, it probably wasn't going to be around for much longer than a month or two. There's a lot of outstanding debt due to our VCs from the original raises. There was a couple bridge notes that were coming due very quickly. And we had no growth. There had been no sales, I think, in almost 3 years at that time. And really, where is it going from here? Maintaining, holding on to our current clients would only do so much. So, after the pandemic hit, things became, difficult in the sense that we knew we weren't making sales at that time, but we had to maintain and keep our current clients really happy. So my core focus was just, we all work here. Let's do everything we can. Doesn't matter if it fits within their contract or not. Like, we're going to be here no matter what. So let's provide them everything we can in this time so they can reach their visitors while the doors are closed. So with that kind of led it to, okay, what are we going to do about, the company not being able to sustain beyond this point. So that's when an interim CEO was brought in. They came in and, very quickly realized there was a lot of financial irregularities. What's
irregularities?
Irregularities. Thank you.
I have trouble with some random words like that sometimes too.
Yeah. A lot of financial irregularities that were happening, and kind of said, I don't want any part of this. This stuff is, it's not going to be maintainable. Like, best case scenario, company gets shut down, VCs write it off as one of the startups that didn't work out. Whereas I have a very strong loyalty to clients. And if we said we're providing these things, like we need to figure out how to do that and continue doing that. And they trusted us. So I had a really good relationship with, all of our clients at that point, spoke to them, on a weekly basis, really connecting with them to make sure we were meeting their needs. And, ultimately the board made the decision to remove one of the original co-founders. And I stepped in as a CEO. And at the time, thankfully, I had a really good advisor, because my initial reaction was like, I can hold this fort down for a week or two, but I'm not a CEO. I have no experience in being a CEO. I don't really know what that's comprised of. Whereas my advisor at the time was like, you're already doing it. You've been doing it for months. You're pretty much the only one running the show here. You need to continue doing that. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a try and see what happens. And in that process, it actually, became apparent that, maybe I was pretty good at it. And so in the matter of about a 12-month period, I was able to, kind of right-side the company. I cut costs on one side and focused on sales on the other side, and actually pretty much broke even within the first 6 months, got us back to a place where we started to focus just on growth, and was able to flip the company to be right-side, within a 12-month period, and close with a profitable year, which had never happened prior to that. So that was kind of the first mark on there where I was like,
what year was that, by the way?
That was 2021.
Okay. So that was a tough year, I'm sure. It probably started out as a really tough year for museums.
Yes. the great thing is that museums were starting to make a shift at that time where suddenly in 2020 they realized most, maybe some of the high level museums like, the MoMAs or fine arts museums, kind of around the US, they had maybe some digital aspects that they were already doing and putting out to the public. But there became a push of like, oh, we need a digital strategy that's ongoing and, continuing to do this. And some places had, the ability to do it in-house, and maybe we're able to be a little more cheeky about it. Like the Getty Museum, they did a fantastic job of, reaching their visitors through social media with, kind of some cheeky stuff that they put out there that users really enjoyed, and they actually created quite a nice following from that. But seeing places like that happen, maybe some of the smaller institutions throughout the US were like, okay, maybe it's not as scary as we thought it was, and we can kind of branch out into these areas as well. So that's when it kind of led to, okay, we're actually starting to do really well, and we're growing. I think we had never seen actual growth on our books before, and so in 2021 is when I closed the year with, I think we were at 23% growth for year over year when we basically hadn't done any. So I was like, well, startup world, we got to do something next. So that's when I pitched Series B to Qualcomm, and they were like, yeah, love the ideas, all looks great.
Was Qualcomm one of your original investors?
Yes. Yep.
Did they have,
yep.
I guess they have a venture arm or something, or I wasn't familiar with that.
Yeah, in San Diego, they're one of the, I would say, biggest ones that, kind of invest. They have their own venture arm. They invest in smaller companies, with the idea that, ideally they roll up and, maybe get bought out, which, would be fantastic. So, meeting with Qualcomm, I think, was a really good, and it had its ups and downs. We met with them. I was very pleased that they loved the idea, thought that we could be successful at it, but they were like, your cap table's a mess. Everything is owned by employees who don't work here. You as the CEO have no equity in anything. Like, there needs to be some cleanup here, before we even have a discussion.
So who all, I don't know if you can dive into it, but who all, like, what was all on the cap table? Was it like mostly employees, or was it, I guess Qualcomm was probably obviously on the cap table. Were there other investors on there, or?
Yeah, we had, from our Series A, I think that was one of the things that our previous co-founder was really good at was, kind of going out there, talking to the VCs and getting them, involved. I think we had somewhere in the range of like 20 different people, institutions, all kind of involved in the cap table.
Wow.
But most of them were like, okay, you're 4 years out from your Series A and nothing's happened. Like there's been no trajectory of growth happening here. And, maybe Suzie's been able to prove that there can be growth, but it's not at that rate of, 10x that they want to see. And so, that's when it gave me the power to realize something had to give. We had to do something to help clean up the cap table. There were quite a few bridge notes that had happened, and those were coming due, and nobody had really seen a return on anything. And that's when I started to learn more about the startup world of like, they maybe invest in 20 or 30 in their portfolio, and they'd rather see you shoot for the moon or just completely, fail and back out. Whereas, that's not how I operate. I'm, more of an operator at my heart of like, making things work and if we grow, 5% in 5 years, then I think that's success. We're growing. Whereas to a VC, that's not, and they don't want to wait around for that. So, I had an opportunity to, kind of network with some people where, one of my, I call him an advisor, but more like a friend because I wasn't paying him. He had linked me up with a company that wanted to do a roll-up strategy and had started on it. And they needed a good example of, being able to start that process for their investors. So it was kind of a win-win for me because I got to clean up the cap table and then, ultimately exit the company. Previous investors were, I wouldn't say elated about it, but they were, happy there was a movement and something happened and they were able to close it out on their end. So that's when I sold the company to Live Current Media, which was working on a roll-up strategy. And that was in 2022, which most of 2022 was focused on that. So that was the first catalyst into exiting the company for the first time.
So you sold the whole company, like all 100% of the equity went to that firm?
Yes. Yep. So I sold the company in whole. One of the most important things, for our space and industry is your EIN number. And it gets looked at all the time of like how long you've been in business, what you've been doing. And to lose that number is like, that would essentially be death for us and starting over, because we have things like the cage number, the SAM number, and all those things get looked at in RFPs. And a lot of it has to do with like how long you've been standing. So it was really important to me that I sold the company, as a whole. So sold 100% of the equity to them. Of course, a huge part of it was myself coming in and my teammates coming in. So we got equity in the larger, roll up of things. But Guru itself was 100% owned by the parent company.
I want to take a quick break from the episode and say, if you're enjoying this content, the best way you can say thank you is to subscribe. So if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you're on one of the podcast platforms, hit the subscribe button there as well. And also share it out to your friends and colleagues. If you find this content useful and you think other people will enjoy it as well, please send it out. And back to the episode. Cool. So I think the story is just getting started here. There's a whole nother leg
Yes.
to what comes next. That it's just kind of starting to get juicy. But I think there's like the next part was really when you were telling me the first time, I was just kind of like on the edge of my seat. So if you don't mind continuing, I'd love to share the rest of it.
Yeah. So kind of going into this, everybody was gung-ho, super excited, and was like, this is what we ultimately wanted. We wanted to be part of a bigger team. We wanted to have additional resources where we could share resources and kind of cross-share knowledge on, pretty much everything. So initially coming in, there was a lot of, getting together, teams really overlapping, understanding one another, and really kind of focusing on like, okay, how do we all grow as like a community into our spaces? And initially, everything was great. Everybody was happy. We were doing all those things. But then their funding ultimately fell through. And, they had a portion of funding come in, which kind of kicked off the initial phase of things. But then, kind of as the days and weeks and months started to progress on, there was always, okay, well, now we're looking at this avenue, and now we're looking at this avenue. And
So was
then
that funding to buy the company, or was that funding for operations?
funding for operations to continue the roll-up strategy, to continue bringing on new companies and continuing to grow the community of companies with kind of like-minded products to put out in the space.
So they had already acquired you, but then so you were supposed to be a platform then in this roll up, and then they were going to roll up other like add-ons into your platform.
Yes. Yep. And so that's when their funding started to dwindle. They're maybe getting little pieces here or there in certain avenues, but it became pretty clear that Guru was the only company that was actually profitable and had a source of revenue coming in. And so initially the first couple months funding from Gurus going to the parent company, and ultimately they own us. I definitely fought back as much as I possibly could on supporting and stabilizing my own team and making sure that we were able to service our clients. But any of our kind of overhead was going to the parent company. And since we were really the only company that was successful in the being profitable aspect, it ended up being decided to use us to leverage debt. And so Guru's books were ultimately leveraged against in order to secure additional funding, debt capital, to maintain and continue to drive the parent company, which initially if additional stuff came in, would have been fine. But after probably about 5 months of that, I was like, okay, something's got to give. It's either, we all go down or there's going to be a split here where we've got to figure things out. So my, first path was to take us back to market and see what I could do with Guru on the open market. And
and was the PE like supportive of you reselling it?
Yeah. They kind of knew because it was very friendly. Like they were people that I'd met with for a while. We had common friends, and they didn't want to see Guru go out of business from this transaction. So they were supportive of me bringing it back to market, and I did that. We got, I think, 3 term sheets initially, all for what I would consider, it was probably like 1.5 revenue were most of the term sheets, and kind of market standard for what we are in our industry. But ultimately, one of the companies that we had a term sheet with, they were looking at doing a roll up in the museum space. And as soon as we got to the sales cycle aspect of it, when they realized like, okay, if you've got a sales cycle that, averages between 1 year and 375 days, that's a really hard sales cycle to be able to expedite and grow at the 7% rate or the 7x rate that they were looking to hit. So they ultimately were like, we think maybe the museum industry is not what we thought it was, and we're going to bow out. So that was one of them. Another one was one that actually created the catalyst for the team and I to buy the company out. They were a little more aware of the current situation, that maybe the parent company was struggling, and there was going to be a time where it would become a fire sale. We maybe weren't there yet, but they were, aware that it was going to get to there. So initially they had come in, with the idea they were going to come in with, a pretty nice offer, all cash. But then once they started to think about it, they were like, oh, maybe it's not the right fit, but if you guys, go back to market and it doesn't work, let us know. So after the other term sheets fell through, we go back to them, and they kind of threw in a pretty low ball offer, which ultimately the parent company accepted, because by that time it was like, okay, yeah, we gotta, Guru's, either everybody's going under or we let Guru go, and maybe they're successful over here. The issue with that for me is it was an asset sale. And that meant that, even though I was told, you won't lose control of the company, you'll still be able to make the decisions, I knew that there was no coming back from that. Guru didn't really exist after that. We were an asset in somebody else's portfolio. Yes, we could still use our name, but that's not what the team and I had been working for the past 4 years, was to just become an asset in somebody else's portfolio where they could ultimately decide whatever they wanted to do with the product. And maybe say the museum space isn't, going to expedite or grow the way we want it to, so we're going to use it over here, which is, not what we wanted. So that's when we started brainstorming, like, well, with this lowball offer, like, we've just got to beat it. And, the clock is ticking. We've got about a month before this offer expires. And if we're able to come up with, just slightly higher than what they came in as, like, there's not really going to be a choice. Like, they're going to kind of have to go with ours because it's a better offer. And so the team and I kind of just put our heads together, our retirements, all of our family and friends, and ultimately raised enough capital to bring it to the table and say, here's our offer. We'd like to buy the company and kind of take it over and just have it be self-owned. And so that was about a month sprint of getting that all together, which basically is just comprised of the team and myself, a couple of my family members, a couple of the team's family members, and probably one of my favorites is one of the original co-founders, who's also now on our board, was just thrilled to be back involved in the company. She originally had the concept for Guru in the first place, and so was super excited to support and be an owner in Guru again. So we, basically just made it happen with a shoestring and just coming together. And ultimately, after a month or two of paperwork and all that fun stuff, now actually own the company outright.
So that, like, when I first heard that story, I was blown away. And congrats. I know you just got the paperwork finalized, and, Guru Experience is officially owned by you and the team and your, angel investors that are involved now. So it's very much an independent company, free of, private equity or VC or any of that kind of stuff. So it's super exciting to hear that. And I feel like, I was reflecting on that story before we recorded today, and it's like, the first time in Guru history that, Guru Experience history, that you've been sort of unencumbered by whether it's like market economic forces or investment, investor forces, or just some kind of like weight that's holding the company back. Like, this is the first time you're free from all that. So I'm super excited to see what you do with it next and where it goes. Just congrats on all that.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. I have to agree that that's always been kind of my struggle, not coming from, the business world or the startup world, initially was like, can we just, focus on what we actually do and less about, all the company high level, ins and outs and selling and raising and all of that stuff. Like, I just want to do what we do and do it well. And for the first time, at least since it raised, their Series A in the beginning, like that is actually the focus, is just focusing on our product and making it better and, eliminating all the tech debt that built up over the time, focusing on these other things, just being able to focus on creating new products, bettering the product, enhancing it, and connecting, with our clients on a deeper level, more one-on-one discovery workshops, and just bettering the experience on site, which is why the team and I are all here in the first place. And we've actually been having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, especially because you're profitable. I mean, all this like financial stuff matters when you're burning cash, I guess, like raising money and investor relations and your growth metrics and all that stuff. But if you're profitable, you could just focus on the product and focus on the customer and just let the keep a little bit of an eye on the P&L, but just let the rest kind of take care of itself while you're, focused on building a really great customer experience for your customers.
Yeah, exactly. That's always, I always say to the team, like, if you have an idea or you think there's something that is, going to help move us one mark closer to being able to secure, some new clients because we don't have these things, like, yeah, let's talk it out and figure out where it fits into the roadmap. And, I think we've got some exciting ideas that we've been working on to, kind of meet the future generations that we want to be going into museums. Museum visitorship is still down significantly from 2019. And it really is about bringing in that younger generation. There was kind of a generational leap that happened during the pandemic time where, I would say, age below my age group is maybe not going to museums and they're not becoming members. Maybe they're going, bringing their families, bringing, young kids, but the membership pool, which is where most museums get a significant amount of their money, memberships turn into donors and so on. And that's really kind of missing in our generation and the generation below, because I think it kind of strives from, subscription fatigue. A membership is another level of subscription, kind of an old school one. But there are definitely ways to reach those people. And if you're serving up those benefits and showing them what they are in a place where they already are, which is on their devices, it's just one step further to help maintain and keep these institutions around, for the younger generations.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the product because you mentioned kind of working through technical debt. I'm curious, like, do you do all your product engineering and product design in-house, or talk to me about the product and the team working on the product?
Yeah, so one of the really beneficial things of becoming part of the parent company is our now CTO was the CTO of a company that he was part of that ultimately sold to the parent company, and he kind of came in with that. They had sold for assets. So, the company essentially had been dissolved, but he is just a whiz at anything and everything tech way, and very much has a similar brain to the way that I work, which means we work really well together. Meaning, like, if he doesn't know how to do it, then he just goes and learns it. Like, you can learn anything on the internet, so he just goes and figures it out, which is very, very important with a small team. wearing many hats and just finding the solution and kind of self-teaching yourself how to do things, because the answers are out there. And so he, kind of came in and really was able to assess that, like, yeah, we have a great base, we have a great product, we have a great place to start from. Everything's cloud-based. It's got, the CMS that the museums or us as a service can maintain, update, evolve the apps. But if we got 10 of those new museums at once, maybe we would be, I wouldn't say in trouble, but we wouldn't have the team to facilitate it. And that's because our infrastructure, when it was originally built, wasn't necessarily built in the way that technology today should be built, where everything's, containerized, automations are being used, and being able to deploy templated base packages with, interchanging components in real time. A lot of that stuff was done manually and created a lot of, branches and forks and all the fun stuff in code that, maybe wasn't lined up the way that it could or should have been for a scalable software that, is SaaS at its core. So he spent the first, after coming in from the parent company, he was kind of helping us work through those things. So he started the containerizing process and really frameworking that out. But when we decided to buy out the company, he had been working with us for a little while. And, I asked him, like, will you come with us? And he was like, yeah. He's like, I love working on a product that actually sees the light of day. He had spent 7 years working on a product that, basically sits on a server somewhere now, and didn't get to have that, users are here, there's feedback, there's stuff to evolve on. So working on real product that's, in the hands, we've got probably across our clients somewhere around the range of 1.5 million users on all of our products at, a given time period. And so having that actual real live scenario where you can evolve and make things better and enhance things based off of, user analytics and feedback coming from the institutions was really just exciting to him. And we are so thankful to have him. So that was one of the greatest things that I think, came out of that whole scenario. But that leads us to, kind of where we are now, where our infrastructure is, we're probably like 3 weeks out. Everything is on staging right now, and we're just throwing everything we can at it to make sure we can't break it. But we're probably in the next 3 weeks are just going to roll out our new phase of it, which is all behind the scenes. Clients won't notice any difference whatsoever. But it was something that needed to happen, which just allows us to, we get 15 new clients in 1 month. We could get 100 in 1 month. It wouldn't matter because each one's its own container and each one, operates and runs separately, but they're all derived from the important SaaS part of things, which is the templates that drive it.
Oh, that's awesome. So this fall's big series of events for Guru Experience.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right. I think just one interesting thing we can close on. You were telling me a little bit about the startup scene in San Diego and kind of what that's like. I also think you told me, maybe I'm mistaken, but I think you told me at one point one of your mentors was the founder of GoFundMe. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, so the startup scene in San Diego, surprisingly, is small. I realized once I got out here. and just being able to be in the same place with them and kind of network and get invited to things. Evo Nexus is one of the kind of startup think tanks that there is here, and Guru was part of it back in the day. And even though I wasn't involved in it back in the day, I kind of got invited to be part of it now. So I work with them closely, sometimes get asked to be mentors for, new companies coming in, but it's really fun to just be part of that process. But that it always gets your brain turning when you're hearing about some of these, younger companies that are just started or the way that they're working, but being able to, introduce them or talk to them about, things that we've tried in the space, even though we're in completely different industries, there's always overlap in the startup scene of things. But one of the original board members and I think at the time maybe an angel investor at first, and then maybe he invested through one of his investment arms. But Andy Ballister, co-founder of GoFundMe, was very, very helpful to me when I took over as CEO from a tech standpoint. As much as I love tech, I don't know what I don't know. And the whole infrastructure, full stack stuff that happens behind the scenes was just not, something I could learn on the fly that quickly to be able to assess what to do with the company. So he was very helpful and beneficial, in that process and helping me kind of navigate it. But, to this day, he actually just launched a new company that he's co-founded. So he's been very involved with that, but we connect on a, semi-regular basis and just kind of share the information of stuff. And he's great at connecting me with the people, since he knows so many of like, oh, you should talk to so-and-so about, whatever they've experienced, something very similar, and just share knowledge and share ideas. As well as UCSD, the college here has a whole innovation department and arm. And I've been talking with them. Actually, they asked me to be a mentor to some of their students in that department. So hopefully in January, I think, is when their new mentor program starts up. So excited to be part of that and do that. But really just, it's a different scene compared to the East Coast, being, East Coast native. It's a different world out here in terms of younger generation really thinking about business and startup and running companies and coming out with new ideas, whereas like that was not the conversations of at least my teen years in the East Coast.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good, Boston, New York have great startup scenes. Obviously, the West Coast, you've got San Francisco and Silicon Valley and Seattle, and then Austin, Texas, and Midwest. Philly's got a pretty good scene, but I think it's probably like it's small, like you said about San Diego, where you spend enough time here in Philly and meet the founders, you pretty much you meet a lot of them pretty fast. There's definitely, what's interesting about Philly is there's some really big companies, like tech companies, that are just so under the radar. They're just they don't get out, they're not at events. Like DuckDuckGo is based right in the suburbs of Philly, and Gabe Weinberg, who's the founder, he's like super quiet. Like he doesn't get out and do stuff. Like he's just heads down on product all the time. And I've seen him at events years and years ago, but that's like there's a bunch like that in Philly that are just kind of under the radar, that are just heads down, like just churning out products. But the people that come out and like kind of hang out and network and do stuff, it's it's a lot of the same people. You'll see a lot of the same faces over and over again. So it feels like you're in a small pond. In Philly, even Philly's a big city too. It's like the 5th largest in the country. So it's interesting.
Yeah, no, it's probably one of my favorite parts about being involved in this. As much as I'm technically an introvert at heart, I always am excited about the stuff that I'm, learning when I actually do involve myself and do those things. So, even doing this with you today is like me, knowing that I need to break out of my shell and be involved in these things, because that's where the inspiration sparks. That's where you learn new ideas that, maybe you're not gonna think of on your own. So just having these conversations is, I thank you, and I really appreciate it, because it definitely helps me think about things in new ways and new lights.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you came on. The story is amazing. I'm super excited to share it with the listeners. And it really when you first told me this time around, I know the story, but even still, I'm kind of like on the edge of my seat, like hearing all the details. Super amazing. I'm really happy to see that Guru Experience pushed through all that and survived, and is now poised for better growth and more sustainable growth than ever in his, in its lifetime. So really excited for you and the team. Is there anything else you want to close on? Like any plugs you want to do for your team or your product, or anything you want to kind of like call out?
Yeah, I would say, to any younger listeners, like, don't be afraid of the things you don't know, and find advisors. That's probably one of the best things that, happened for me. Was I found people who they believed in me and helped me believe in myself. But also being, I'm probably transparent to a fault with my team, which sometimes, can make people worried or concerned, but it builds a level of trust that, the team knows that I'm there for them and they're there for me, and that we're in this together. It's not just, one of us who's trying to drive things, but everybody has a voice, and everybody has a desire to get to where we're going. So, kind of my two things are: break out of your shell, figure out things you don't know, find a way to learn them, talk to people. There's a lot of shared knowledge out there, and most people are excited to share their knowledge. So listen, talk, and for me, being transparent, I think, is super important.
Cash flow? Did you clear your cash flow?